cells. The reason we have to think about these in human anatomy and physiology is because cells make up our tissues, which make up every organ in our bodies. So kind of an important thing to understand as we start working our way through this chapter. Now, the cell is the functional unit of life. Basically, your cells are alive. Anything smaller than a cell, like organelles, couldn't survive on their own. But an individual cell, it can. And those cells all come together to make our tissues. Tissues make our organs, organ systems, organism. So it's kind of that building block, that foundational unit. We need to understand how it works. So our organismal activity really depends on these cells. The various different types of cells we have in our bodies. Cells that are helping with nervous transmission, cells that are helping with muscular contraction, cells that are structural basis, things that are helping with bone, for example. So we have different types of cells, but overall, the cells are going to have the same basic structural and makeup components. Principle of complementarity. Now, the idea of principle of complementarity is the different types of cells complement each other. They work together. Take, for example, the heart. The heart has cardiac muscle tissue, so cardiac muscle cells. Those cells are working in conjunction with the blood cells, think your red blood cell, to transport the body. The red blood cells couldn't transport through the body without those muscle cells. But those muscle cells couldn't work without the energy and oxygen from the blood cells. So we have a lot of cells working together, the idea of principle of complementarity. And cells come from pre-existing cells. Every cell in your body originates from a previous cell. Now you're saying, well, we have hundreds and thousands and tens of thousands of cells in our body. True. Those all came from the initial two cells, the egg and the sperm, that joined to start the development. Cells develop from previous cells. You have what are called stem cells in your body. Now, some of the stem cells can make any cell in the body. Those are the ones that are back in the zygote when you first had the egg and sperm. But now, towards the adult stage, you have some of those left over, but most are more differentiated. You have these cells that can only make a certain type of tissue or a certain type of cell. But all cells come from previous cells. So here's an idea of an overall general cell. Now sure, specialized cells look different. They have different shapes, different sizes. But this is to get an idea of what is in the vast majority of our cells. And I say vast majority because there are specialized cells that don't have the same components to this. You'll see here the nucleus, the ER, the smooth and rough ER. You have the Golgi, you have the centrioles, you have the mitochondria, the plasma membrane, the cytosol. All these parts we need to go through and discuss what they do, what their functions are, that means, as well as where you can find them. So let's start off in the plasma membrane. Now, each cell in your body has a plasma membrane. The plasma membrane is made up of these phospholipids. You'll notice the phospholipids are going to have a head and a tail. The head you can see here is going to have the phosphate group as well as the glycerol. Now, this head is going to be hydrophilic. But if we switch down to the tail region, you'll notice the tail region, they have here saying saturated and unsaturated. Go back to the chemistry, hopefully remember that saturated meant every bond possible was binding something different, while the unsaturated has double bonds. The double bonds means that you could use a single bond there and have these single bonds coming off to bond hydrogens, but you did double bond for carbon instead. These are going to be now hydrophobic. So the idea of having both a hydrophilic and hydrophobic together is known as amphiphilic. Amphiphilic is any molecule that has both hydrophilic and hydrophobic components on the same molecule. Now this is going to be really important for our bodies because it allows the hydrophilic sections, the ones that can come in contact with water, as well as in the hydrophobic sections, the ones that can't come in contact with water, to correspond and be in the plasma membrane. It helps to control what's passing through that plasma membrane. It sets up how our cells are going to work. So here's an example of what the phospholipids look like when they're orientated in the actual membrane. You can see the tails are facing the middle, the heads are facing out. The idea is you're creating the hydrophilic regions outside the membrane, so that's the inside the cell and the outside the cell. But then within the actual membrane, this part right here is going to be the hydrophobic section, where you don't really want to have a lot of water touching. So we're looking at this bilayer, this phospholipid bilayer. Put it all together, you end up with what's referred to as the fluid mosaic model of the cell membrane. Fluid mosaic because it's mosaic, it's a mixture of different things. It's not just phospholipids. You can see the other components we have here, we'll talk about in a second. Now the idea of fluid because it's not stationary. It's going to move, it'll change shape, the things push into it, kind of gives a little bit. It allows for slight modifications. So what you look at is the components. Phospholipids make up about 75% of this membrane, which means there's a lot of these throughout your body. They're helping to contain what's inside and create a different environment inside the cell compared to what's outside the cell. But then we have cholesterol. You say, hold on, cholesterol, that's not good. No, too much isn't good. But you actually need cholesterol in your bodies. Your body produces it. Because in this case, you have about 20% of your cell membrane, again, give or take 20%, is there to help give rigidity or structure to the cell membrane. So you can see the cholesterol molecules. There's one here, and one over here. These cholesterol molecules help to give some structure because those phospholipids, they're moving. The cholesterol is more of a rigid structure. So it's helping out to make sure we can keep everything structurally sound and these membranes stay intact. Glycolipids. Now I have here about 5%, give or take depending on the cell. But glycolipids, we have different types, and we have one here I mentioned, glycocalyx. A glycocalyx is going to be a carbohydrate-rich area of the cell membrane. There's an example of one right here. So you have a glycolipid with a carbohydrate attached. Now, this can be used for various different purposes, and we'll get to that later in the course to go through things. But just keep in mind that we can have carbohydrates attached to the lipids on the cell membrane surface. And then we have proteins. Now, proteins, I didn't list off any particular one because we'll go through those more later in this part. But proteins can play different roles. You can have proteins like a glycoprotein. That's going to be a protein that then has a carbohydrate coming off. Could be for messaging or attachment purposes. Could be for identification. You can have channel proteins. These channel proteins, those ones are allowing substances to pass through. Now, depending on the channel, it could differentiate one particular ion or allow a whole series of ions to pass through. You then have this integral membrane protein that can help give more structure, just like the cholesterol was. These integral membrane proteins giving structure and form to the protein in the membrane, as well as sometimes helping to kind of bring these different cell membranes together. And then we have this peripheral membrane. Now, if you notice the difference here, the peripheral membrane is only having that protein on the outside. So the peripheral protein is only on the outside of the cell, while the integral membrane protein goes through both layers of the phospholipid. But again, structure, connection. These different proteins can play different roles depending on what cells, what particular cells you're looking at. But regardless, This whole membrane is going to have a lot of things going on. It's not just one structure, one piece. It's differing structures, differing parts, all adapting and working for the cell, making sure the cell is functioning properly and maintaining its normal homeostatic internal environment. So to go forward, we got to figure out, how does the membrane do this?